Recently, a specific issue has been called into question, and that question is whether or not women's professional wrestling can draw money. Now, this can be rather difficult to talk about for several reasons. One, there are a lot of people who really do have a hard time talking about this subject honestly. Also, there are some very compelling arguments on both sides of the line, and furthermore, we're also lacking a lot of the evidence that we need in order to draw a thorough conclusion ourselves. But that's all the more reason why we have to have this discussion, and we should treat it more like a conversation rather than definitively proving that we know the answer one way or the other, because we don't. And so, all that is exactly why this long overdue discussion is the topic of this episode. Because today... A big thank you to all of my Patreon supporters such as Edgar Perez and Bob86. Thank all of you so much. Before we get into the video, please be sure that you're subscribed to this channel and that you leave a like, as I really do appreciate it. Thanks in advance. First off, this is a loaded topic, and currently there's no information out there that would prove one way or another definitively that this is right or wrong. So instead, we really should be discussing this rather than acting like we know for sure. So with that being said, let's just get into it. And we're going to be doing that by breaking down the argument into three main parts. And the first part is a somewhat recent issue. Recently released WWE talent Mickie James has stated that she was told women's wrestling doesn't make money. She mentioned that she pitched an idea and was willing to lead a new venture for WWE. What if we do an all-female brand? If I could lead up that and have an awesome team of women, we have the talent, tools, and facilities. It would really help the girls who are not getting television time. She was told in response, they're never going to do it. Ever. And the leading piece of evidence for this alleged statement was WWE Evolution was the lowest rated pay-per-view ever in WWE. And if this is true, that would explain why we never got another all-women's pay-per-view after that October 2018 event. However, that statement does raise a few questions, such as, what exactly does the lowest rated mean? Does it mean in terms of pay-per-view buy rate? Because if it does, well, ever since the WWE Network launch, you automatically got all pay-per-views for only $9.99. Buy rates for pay-per-views have all dropped, so I don't imagine having a low pay-per-view buy rate really should matter. However, if they mean rated as in Nielsen ratings as in viewership, well, that's going to be hard to find out since WWE Network viewing numbers are not readily available to the public. However, attendance figures are, and so while they may not be the same thing, they're probably the closest thing we have to go off of in terms of people paying to see this event. And when we look at it, WWE Evolution only received 10,900 in attendance, although that number might not be all there is to it. The event was held in the Nassau Coliseum, a much smaller venue than where WWE normally plays for pay-per-view events, such as the Survivor Series, which followed Evolution in the Staples Center, and that building maxes out at 21,000 seats for professional wrestling. However, they only sold 16,325 seats. The Nassau Coliseum, on the other hand, that peaks out at, well, that's kinda difficult to answer. As far as its capacity for wrestling is concerned, well, they don't have those numbers listed, but its largest performance seating is 15,000 for concerts. And while that's not exactly the most accurate number, it's pretty much what we got. Overall, by using these figures, both shows were short by around 5,000 of a full house, meaning that in terms of ticket sales at least, this really isn't that bad per capita. And while this space might seem like it's fairly close to New York City, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. To many New Yorkers, this is something of an excursion, so don't let its proximity to NYC fool ya. The Coliseum isn't banking on that city crowd, and for many residents of New York City, going out to Long Island might as well be a mission to Mars. So perhaps, if it was located in a more populated area or a better venue, it might have also performed better too. No, we don't know that for sure, and a lot of this information is tentative at best, but it's at least worth consideration. Now, the other interpretation of what lowest rated might mean is that lowest rated might have to do with critical rating, as in star rating. But if it does, allow me to point out that Becky and Charlotte fell just a quarter star short of 5 stars according to the Meltzer rating. And I know, and I'm not trying to say that a star rating is important, I'm just trying to say that we were looking for a critic and he happens to be one. Oh, and by the way, the lowest match on the card was the opener with only 2.25 stars. However, when we compare that against the fake ECW pay-per-view of December to Dismember, that show's highest match was 3.25 stars, with the lowest being negative a star. And so, by that critical metric, WWE Evolution couldn't possibly be the lowest rated ever. But, even if it was, notice that there's a bit of a disconnect here, because when it comes to critical analysis, that doesn't draw any money, and for that matter, neither do pay-per-view buys in this day and age, as we already established, and nor do network views themselves. Which means that ticket sales is really the only thing that we can look at, and that wasn't even part of the equation for being rated. And also, allow me to point out that NXT Chicago, which took place in that same year, only made 11,000 in ticket sales, which is about the same as All In did, which was also in Chicago. Both shows barely beat out Evolution, even though they were in a much bigger city, which is just pretty interesting. However, even though it doesn't appear that women are the worst draws, WWE Evolution still wasn't a major moneymaker. But when it comes to that, I think personally it all comes down to the wrestling promotion, as in promoting wrestling. And that's where I think this pay-per-view fell short, as the build was definitely subpar. WWE could have hyped up matches much better. They could have built better stories, advertised the event more, and really done things to get fans excited to see it, which I say they failed to do. Personally, I wanted to see Hugger Bailey versus Molly Holly, or even Bailey versus Ivory, who Bailey herself teased on social media. Which is the sad part, because when it came to the promotion of Evolution, it's the women who were in it that were doing most of the promoting themselves. Which is the very job that WWE as a promotion should be doing. But on that note, let's move on to the second part of this three-part discussion, and that's, is a woman's roster even promotable in the first place? And unfortunately, that's not as simple a question as it sounds. Okay, for this thought experiment, I need you to not think about individual women. What I'm asking you is the idea of women wrestling enough to attract audiences on its own? Again, don't think about specific individual women here. Now, of course, this has a complicated answer, as there are some who will say no flat out, while there are others who will say yes, but only do so for reasons that may not be approved by everyone. Back in the Attitude Era, there was a particular stipulation for women's matches that probably wouldn't fly today, and I think you know what kind of match I mean. And much to the dismay of many, for most of wrestling history, this is how women's wrestling was promoted. It was pushed for its provocativeness more than anything else. Now, aside from matches like that, there's also the concept of the special attraction. The idea that people will tune into something just because it's such a rarity that it has to be seen, and that rarity is exactly what you're selling. And when it comes to women's wrestling, there are some who feel that that is all that it is, and that the spectacle of seeing females fighting is the major selling point and nothing more. However, there are others still who would completely disagree with that, believing that it might have been true once upon a time, but in today's world, women's wrestling isn't a novelty. It's a reality, and that you can't sell a roster just because there are females on it. You can't say, buy WWE, now with women. Although, there are some people who think you still can. For instance, just look at the gorgeous ladies of wrestling, both the original promotion and the Netflix series. The two were sold on the idea of women wrestling, and while the OG Fed was during the 80s, the hit sitcom was produced in the modern day, and that show became a success because it was a fairly unique topic to make a sitcom out of. But uniqueness might be the exact point here, because there are some who feel that that is exactly how you sell the concept of women wrestling. People love being a part of the first, and people love being a part of historic moments. The first WrestleMania main evented by women, the first women's pay-per-view, and so on. Some will say that the novelty today is selling people on being a part of the first time that women do anything. However, as those firsts begin to wear out, you'll eventually have nothing left to sell. And adding to the idea that women's wrestling alone doesn't have a large enough supportive fan base, let's talk about kayfabe. Not the wrestling term, but rather the project that was started by Lita, Gail Kim, and Christy Hemme, which was going to be a female-driven wrestling show that was to be funded by Kickstarter. It didn't make its goal, only receiving around $62,000, about a sixth of their overall target. Could this be a sign that while the internet talks big, it's really just bluster from a vocal minority, because when push comes to shove, they really just don't put their money where their mouth is? Although, speaking of money, there is one last point to bring up in this discussion, and that is Becky Lynch. When it comes to drawing and making money, Becky Lynch was the highest grossing merch seller in 2019. And I don't mean female merch seller, I mean merch seller, period. Beating out both Roman Reigns and Bray Wyatt, Becky outsold everyone in merchandise. And while she might be alone at the top, there are other women who had really good merch sales too. Alexa Bliss, Asuka, Sasha Banks, among many others, all did really well in this department. Which is pretty important to take note of, because contrary to what the internet normally does, it's not an all or nothing scenario. You're not either the greatest star of all time or just someone who can't draw money. There is a lot of nuance in between. Now, for me, personally, when it all boils down and we look at all the evidence we collected, the concept of women's wrestling alone doesn't draw. But I say individuals can. Individual women can draw, and they can make a lot of money at that. Despite a lot of the press that's going around now, fans don't want genres and they really don't like pandering. They want stories. They want superstars. The Rock didn't become a megastar because of his racial background or because he was a man. He became a megastar because he's a megastar. He's The Rock. And Becky Lynch didn't become the top merch seller because she's a woman. She did so because she's awesome. For me, I put my faith in individuals. A person can draw. A person can succeed. But can a group of individuals who all share one commonality, can they succeed together? Can a group of female wrestlers put on a show that draws money? Well, I for one am curious to find out. Well, there you have it. What do you think about each of these issues? Let me know down in the comments section, and please, yet again, make sure that you're subscribed to this channel and that you give this video a big thumbs up. And while I'm at it, thanks again to all of my awesome Patreon supporters, and thank you for watching. And as always, Dave knows.